Hello everybody, and welcome to my video lecture for Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. It's not likely you have this copy of the book because this is a more expensive copy that has all kinds of extra features. If all you have is the Bantam copy or the Dover Thrift Edition, that's perfectly fine. But anyway, try to have your book handy so you can refer to it a little bit. Now, if this is your first time watching one of my videos this summer, then what you'll need to do is listen to this little disclaimer. If it's your third or fourth time, then you've heard this already, but again, people can read these books in whatever order they want, so this may be somebody's first time. So, a couple of disclaimers. First, I'm going to try to keep these videos under 30 minutes. That's my goal. Look at the little timestamp at the bottom. If it turns out that I may have run a little over, make sure you have enough time to watch this video all the way through. And what might even be better is to have a little extra time in case you want to pause a little bit and go backwards and review something that I've said. My second little disclaimer is I would recommend, rather than just sitting here watching me talk to you, although if you want to, that's perfectly fine, but to make this video lecture make you get more out of it, go ahead and open up the slideshow, the PowerPoint slideshow that's in the Jekyll and Hyde folder in our class page, and follow along with that as we go through this video so that you can kind of understand where I'm coming from. So I'm going to pause for a minute. You can go ahead and hit the pause button on your video player. Go on in there, open up that video, and come back whenever you're ready. All right, we're back. Okay, so Jekyll and Hyde. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my copy of the slideshow. I don't really want to get into a whole lot of the history of the composition of the story, but it is interesting. Robert Louis Stevenson was kind of, he always was a little bit ill. His health wasn't the best in the world. So sometimes he had to write in fits of inspiration. So he might go a year without writing a word and then try to write a book within 6 weeks, which is hard to do. And so that was how this book was composed. Also notice that from the time he was a child, he was always fascinated with the duality of individuals. And the reason was there was a guy by the name of Deacon William Brodie who was a respectable furniture manufacturer by day. He was the furniture manufacturer that all the rich and wealthy people purchased furniture from in London at the time because he made the best quality of furniture. So just like today, there are certain brand names that you buy because you know, even though it may cost a little bit more, that it is the best, well put together product that's available. With Deacon Brodie, it was like that with his furniture in Ireland. Actually, Robert Louis Stevenson was born in Ireland. However, at night he ran a band of thieves, and he and his little band of thieves would steal from people all the time. Brodie got caught. Brodie got outed. He ended up being put on trial and being hung for his crimes because being a thief back then was a capital punishment type of crime. So Stevenson, because he had one of Brodie's chests in his nursery when he was growing up and in his bedroom, he was fascinated by what makes a guy be perfectly respectable during the day and be a criminal at night. And so he tried to write a play about Brodie's life. It ended up failing both critically and commercially. But he always was fascinated. He wanted to write a story like the story of Deacon Brodie. So one night, he was he was a married man. He was having a nightmare one night. And in this nightmare, 3 key scenes ended up in this book that you actually have to read or have read, depending on when you're watching this video. His wife, Fanny, woke him up in the middle of the nightmare. And Stevenson got all upset about it and said, "Hey, what did you wake me up for? I was dreaming a fine bogey tale." And then he got out of bed, grabbed a pencil and paper, and wrote down everything he could remember from the dream. And some of those scenes actually ended up in the actual final finished novel. All right, so he composes the entire first draft in only a few days. He and his wife go downstairs because he lived in a 2-story home. Fanny had had a son from a previous marriage. He reads the story out loud to them. And Fanny tells him that he has missed the allegory, that the story isn't exactly what he wanted to write. And Robert Louis Stevenson pitches a fit. He throws the manuscript into the fireplace where, poof, it ends up disappearing for good. But he thought about it, and he said, you know, my wife is actually right about this. Let me try this again. And he wrote this entire book in 3 days. And the version that you have sitting in your hand right now, or sitting on your desktop, or wherever you're at, that book was written in 3 days' time, and very few changes were made. So that is how the story is composed. To this day, the story has never been out of print. You have always, throughout all of history, from 1886 until today, been able to walk into a bookstore and find a copy of Jekyll and Hyde and purchase it if you wanted to. So that is a very successful. That's the very definition of a successful story. If a book never goes out of print. And then, of course, it is the story that has been adapted more than any other in film history. Not just Jekyll and Hyde, but various variations of it. So that is the history of the composition. Let's go through the main characters of Jekyll and Hyde. We've got Mr. Gabriel Utterson. He is Dr. Jekyll's attorney. Most of the story is told through his point of view, especially the first 8 chapters. Chapter 9 is Lanyon's letter, and Chapter 10 is Jekyll's letter, so we get their points of view in those. But Utterson is the main focus for the first 8 chapters. And this is like a detective story, so in addition to being a lawyer, he's kind of a detective for the police force, and he is on a mission to find this guy, Hyde. And after Hyde murders Danvers Carew, on a mission to find Hyde and bring him to justice. And he's really frustrated because Hyde has the ability to just vanish at certain periods of time and never be heard from. So he is the attorney, and he is also the best friend of Dr. Jekyll. In fact, he is absolutely Dr. Jekyll's best friend. Dr. Henry Jekyll is a chemist. Chemistry was just becoming a real science back in the late 1800s. Of course, there were chemists way before the 1800s, but still, Jekyll is a chemist. And through his chemistry, he wants to perform these experiments, which will eventually create Hyde. Jekyll's obsession is to separate his truly good self from his truly evil self. He was hoping that he would create 2 people, not just create one body that had 2 different personalities. In fact, split personalities can be a theme of this story, if you want to think of it that way. Mr. Edward Hyde is Henry Jekyll's alter ego. He's the evil self that Jekyll wants to separate himself from, but unfortunately for Jekyll, the 2 men are inextricably attached to each other because they share the same body. Hasty Lanyon is another good friend of Jekyll's and Utterson's. However, because of differences of scientific opinion, Lanyon and Jekyll have a falling out. So that's a very important key point to make about this story. Mr. Richard Enfield is a distant cousin and a Sunday walking companion of Mr. Utterson. Danvers Carew is a gentleman who's going to get brutally murdered by Hyde. Poole is Jekyll's butler. Poole actually has a pretty decent sized role considering that he's only a servant. And Mr. Guest, who only appears very briefly, is Utterson's main law clerk and his handwriting expert. Mr. Guest is the one that actually reveals that there are a lot of similarities between Dr. Jekyll's handwriting and Mr. Hyde's handwriting. All right. So now that we've actually looked at the characters, let's take a look at some themes that are prevalent throughout Jekyll and Hyde. And one is the duality of humans. In fact, some people have even gone so far as to say that one of the themes in this duality of humans theme itself is split personalities. There are people that have the split personality disorder. And Jekyll and Hyde can be a symptom of that as well. Jekyll and Hyde are 2 sides of the same individual person. Jekyll is the side of himself that wants to be purely good. He wants to be moral. He wants to be an upstanding citizen. He wants to maintain his reputation, which is another theme. He wants to benefit people, do charity, things of that nature. Hyde is purely evil. He really wants nothing more than to satisfy his urges, particularly urges like being able to lash out against people in anger. Also, there is a hint, because he lives in the Soho district and frequents the brothels there, that Hyde is all about satisfying his sexual urges as well. And we all know that a person that satisfies his sexual urges with multiple partners quite frequently is not considered a moral person. That's what Jekyll wants to get away from. Hyde, he's just all about, hey, who's next? So you've got that aspect of it. And of course, Jekyll's attempts to separate the two halves has disastrous results because a man cannot separate his own two halves. We are what we are, and we have to try to repress the bad side of ourselves and to let the good side of ourselves out. Utterson himself is a contradiction. He enjoys the pleasures of life, yet he has the willpower to deny himself these pleasures. For example, there's that line in the very opening where it says that he loves the theater, and yet he hasn't crossed the threshold of a theater, and I want to say it was about 20 years. Yeah, it is. It's 20 years. He has an approved tolerance for others, yet somehow, and sometimes he envies them, but yet somehow he's able to repress his basest urges as well. So he does not judge others for their sins. He'd rather help them recover than to condemn them, but he still is aware of the duality himself. All right, another theme is the nature of good versus evil. Jekyll is portrayed as naturally benevolent. His goodness also makes him a handsome man. You'll see this referred to throughout the book, that Jekyll is very handsome, very pleasing to look at, whereas Hyde is deformed. He's almost monstrous looking. He's shorter than Jekyll. He walks with an arch in his back, and he just people look at him and their blood runs cold because of the fact that he is purely evil. Whereas people look at Jekyll and they don't know of, maybe Utterson and Lanyon know about his basest urges because they grew up together, or maybe not grew up together. They were college pals that did what college pals do on weekends. But people look at him and say, "Oh, what a handsome, what a charitable guy." Hyde is also compared to Satan throughout this novel. In fact, on several occasions you will hear Hyde referred to as Satan himself, and of course, his evil self, or his evil nature, makes him a deformed and repulsive man. People look at him and immediately don't want to see him anymore. They eventually, they pull back, if you will. Then there's morality versus natural desire. This is the very basis for Jekyll's experiments. He says, and this is in the narrative at the very, or Henry Jekyll's full statement of the case, towards the very end of the book, because this is what we get from actual Jekyll himself. Where is this at? This is, let's see, remorse, Anyway, he says in here that what he wants to be able to do is to actually... Oh, here we go. So this is that is one long paragraph. It's in the first paragraph about, goodness gracious, about 3/4 or 4/5 of the way down. He says, okay, I for my part, from the nature of my life, advanced infallibly in one direction only. It was on the moral side and in my own person that I learned to recognize the thorough and primitive duality of man. I saw that the two natures that contended in the field of my consciousness, even if I could rightly be said to be either, it was only because I was radically both. And from an early date, even before the course of my scientific discoveries had begun to suggest the most naked possibility of such a miracle, I had learned to dwell with pleasure as a beloved daydream on the thought of the separation of these elements. If each, I told myself, could but be housed in separate identities, life would be relieved of all that was unbearable. The unjust might go his way, delivered from the aspirations and remorse of his more upright twin, and the just could walk steadily, steadfastly, and securely on his own upward path, doing the good things in which he found his pleasure, and no longer exposed to disgrace and penitence by the hands of this extraneous evil. So that is the moral self and the natural self. That is the duality of man. He wants to be able to put each side, his evil side and his benevolent side, in separate identities, send the evil side off to do whatever he will, and then he can actually live his moral life and derive pleasure from that. Addiction is huge in this. If you follow Henry Jekyll's descent from being a good person down to being completely overwhelmed by Mr. Hyde, you will find that, I don't know if any of you have gone through this, or if you have a relative that has gone through this, or a good friend that has gone through this, but people don't grow up and say, I want to be a meth addict when I grow up, or I want to be an alcoholic when I grow up. They grow up naturally good, but through time, what starts off as being a lot of fun ends up taking over the person's life until finally the person hits rock bottom. Some people find an escape through suicide, which is what Jekyll will do here. Others find escape through counseling or through AA or NA or whatever. But if you follow the steps and notice the gradual descent of somebody you've known into that dark place where they either had to get help or be completely destroyed, Jekyll's addiction to Hyde, his addiction to that, actual potion, acts the same way as alcohol does, or acts the same way as drugs do. So he starts off being fun at first. Hey, I get to, as Hyde, I get to go to Soho and party it up. And then I turn myself back into Jekyll, and boom, I am back to being the nice guy. But his behavior worsens over time. Jekyll gives up Hyde without any outside help for 2 months, and you've heard this story from alcoholics and from drug addicts. I gave up alcohol for a full year with my own willpower, and I said I don't need any kind of counseling, and I don't need any kind of outside help. I am a non-drinker. And then they take one drink, just like Jekyll does here. He says after 2 months, well, you know what? I haven't had fun in a while, and I can handle it now. Boom. He goes out, and when Hyde comes out at that time, the words in the book were, he came out raging, or he came out roaring is what he came out. And the same thing happens to addicts. The first drink they take after a year of not taking one, all of a sudden their alcoholism comes back with a fury. There's always the whole, I can give it up anytime I want. Hyde will say that, or Jekyll will say that about Hyde. Jekyll goes into seclusion, pushes his best friends away, just like addicts will push their best friends away and say, I just want to be left alone. And eventually, just like Jekyll is lost forever, sometimes addicts get lost forever. So addiction, you can follow the steps of addiction by following the steps of Dr. Jekyll's descent. What role should science play? Lanyon and Jekyll have differing ideas of what role science should play. This parallels what's going on in the world in 1886 when this book is published. In 1886, the church is losing influence and losing power, and science is gaining it. And oh, by the way, have you noticed that there is a big debate going on now between creationists that think the world is about 6,000 years old and everything was designed by one God, and scientists who say, no, the world is billions of years old, and everything happened naturally. There was no God hand in this. Well, who's right? So just like the science versus God is a big debate today, and what role should science play? Should we clone is a big debate going on in the world today. Should we create clones in order to help people get cured of diseases, or are we playing God by creating clones and therefore being immoral? That is a stem cell. That's another. Should scientists be allowed to use stem cells in order to cure diseases, or is it wrong to get a woman pregnant, abort her fetus, and then pull the stem cells out of it in order to cure somebody of a disease? So all of these science questions that are being raised today were just beginning to be raised in the 1800s, and by 1886, when this book is published, this book also addresses the issue of what role should science play. And the final theme is reputation. Dr. Jekyll's main motivation for his experiments were to preserve his reputation by removing those immoral urges. Let's go back to the passage I read. He wanted to take his immoral self and send it away so that everybody in the world would think of him as being the perfect guy. He actually has a dinner party. In fact, Utterson talks about this, I think. And where does this occur at? This occurs in the chapter on, not the last night. It's the chapter before that. Was it Incident at the Window? No. It was the one, the remarkable incident of Dr. Lanyon, perhaps. Incident of the letter. Nope. Nope. Okay, it's actually earlier on. It's not the Carew murder case. Oh, actually, maybe it is right after the Carew murder case. Or before that. Jekyll Quiet at Ease. Duh. So the Jekyll Quiet at Ease chapter. This is a fortnight later. This is the very opening of that chapter. Dr. Jekyll was quiet at ease. A fortnight later, by excellent good fortune, the doctor gave one of his pleasant dinners to some 5 or 6 old cronies, all intelligent, reputable men, and all judges of good wine. And Mr. Utterson so contrived that he remained behind after the others had departed. There was no new arrangement, but a thing that had been followed many scores of times. Where Utterson was liked, he was well liked. So where Utterson was liked, he was well liked. So he has a good reputation. Hosts loved to detain the dry lawyer when the light-hearted and the loose-tongued had already set foot on the threshold. They liked to sit a while in unobtrusive company, practicing for solitude, sobering their minds, da-da-da. To this rule, Dr. Jekyll was no exception, and he now sat opposite on the side of the fire, a large, well-made, smooth-faced man of 50 with something of a stylish cast, perhaps, but every mark of capacity and kindness. You could see by his looks that he was cherished for Mr. Utterson a sincere and warm affection. And we keep going on. Jekyll then talks about it in his narrative about how, let's see, motivation, how this is pretty deep into this chapter. About midway through, Jekyll stood at times aghast before the acts of Edward Hyde, but the situation was apart from ordinary laws and insidiously relaxed the grip of conscience. It was Hyde, after all, and Hyde alone that was guilty. Jekyll was no worse. He awoke again to his good qualities, seemingly unimpaired. He would even make haste where it was possible to undo the evil done by Hyde. Thus his conscience slumbered. Then after Hyde stomps on the girl, he's going to say, This is pretty deep in here. Well, this is about, I don't know, about 2/3 of the way through, 3/4 of the way through. He talks about, for 2 months, however, I was true to my determination. For 2 months I had led a life of such severity as I had never before attained to, and enjoyed the compensations of proving conscious. Well, I can go on and on through this, but eventually you realize that Jekyll is worried about what other people think of him. Jekyll's worried about people thinking of him as being perfect. And because of that, he creates this potion that separates Mr. Hyde from him. And that is all that Jekyll cares about. As long as people don't know it's him that's committing these awful crimes in a different form, then his reputation will be sterling. And that is what he wants more than anything else. But at times his reputation does get damaged as he tries to protect Hyde. And he also lies and keeps secrets from everybody, including Utterson, to protect his reputation. So that is a very important theme in this book as well. So that's pretty much it. That is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or at least my video lecture of that. I hope you find this video enlightening, especially if you're going to write your research paper on this. There's plenty of material on everything we've talked about. And happy reading.